Um, as Americans, and we're going to wrap up Ruth today, so Ruth chapter 4, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going. As Americans, we have long celebrated the individual as an important part of our national and cultural heritage. We recognize that individual people are unique, they are important, and they have great potential. You like the sound of that? I do. Individual people have had extraordinary accomplishments and have made extraordinary contributions to who we are as a nation. If I said to you the name George Washington, you know who he is and what he did, at least some of it. If I said to you Benjamin Franklin, you know who he was and what he did, or at least some of it. If I said to you Thomas Jefferson, you know who he was and what he did, or at least some of it. If I said to you John Hancock, you know that there's a building named after him and he wrote with really big handwriting. Right? Yes, no? I know this is starting to sound like history class, so I'll move on. Rugged individualism, though, is not without some pitfalls. There are some inherent risks in our fascination with individualism. But the potential of the individual far outweighs the risks and makes it worth navigating. Having individuals who are celebrated as individuals, who are recognized as individuals, and who accomplish as individuals. Unfortunately, we live in a day where the individual is under attack. Not each of us individually, but the idea of the individual is under attack. Increasingly, what we find is the group is replacing the individual as the cornerstone of our culture. This is, I think, unfortunate and dangerous. Unfortunate because it diminishes each of us as individuals. We are no longer viewed as individuals. Very much we are a number, not a name. We are part of the group that we ascribe to or are assigned to, and our worth and mark as an individual is diminished. And I think that's unfortunate, because I don't want to be defined by the group that I'm in. I have never fit well inside a box. One of the reasons our church is independent is because we as a church are a collection of individuals who are so individual we don't fit very well in anybody else's box. And so I've always struggled to fit in the box that I was supposed to fit in. It just chafes me. And I think that being lumped together as a group is unfortunate. Whatever box you want to make it. I root for the Patriots. I'm going to root for the Patriots today. I would never dream of rooting against the Patriots, but I root for other teams occasionally. I rooted for the Cowboys this week. Wow. I'm really hoping the Patriots fare better. But I don't want to be lumped into, that Pats fan or even that New Englander. I consider myself a New Englander by choice, though not a New Englander by birth, but I certainly don't want all of the stuff that goes along with that group description being assigned to me. For instance, I do know what the letter R is supposed to sound like. I'm just saying, no offense. But if I offended you, then you can get to the back of the line and I'll get around to somebody else. It's unfortunate that we are viewed as a group and no longer as an individual. But it's also dangerous. Dangerous because the emphasis on the group leads to two things that we don't like. The first is conflict. Because if I'm part of this group and you're part of that group, there is inherent, at least competition, if not absolute conflict. The other danger is far worse, is that this whole idea of being lumped into groups leads to fascism. And that's not someplace we want to go. And yet, as you look at the national scene, that's someplace that we're sprinting toward. It's dangerous. And it becomes so inert in our culture that the individual becomes a danger to the culture. The individual, the idea of the individual is dangerous, or a threat at least, to the group, which makes being an individual and standing out as an individual that much harder, because by not being a part of any group, all of the groups will dislike you. All of the groups will see you as a threat because you're not one of any of them. And that's the tragedy that's unfolding all around us in our culture today. Individuals are losing the opportunity and the ability to be extraordinary because groups don't support extraordinary individuals. I think that loss will hurt us collectively as a nation in the long term, but it pains us personally in the near term, because there is still something within each of us that longs to be extraordinary. I don't think anybody sets out to say, I'm going to be as plain as possible. I want to be just vanilla my entire life. I want to be par. I want to be average. I want to be unnoticeable, undistinguishable from everyone around me. As teenagers, we dressed to stood out, didn't we? Well, at least like the rest of our group did. Sometimes as adults, we do the same thing. There is just something within us that cries for the individuality, that cries to be extraordinary. I mean, who makes a movie about average people? When was the last time that you saw The Rock play somebody completely boring and average? No, he's got to be the guy jumping out of helicopters and saving the day and saving everybody. I mean, it's like the power of his biceps could hold the San Andreas Fault together. He tried. Gave it a good go. But we don't make movies about average because it's boring. We don't ascribe to be average because it's boring. We ascribe, we hunger, we desire to be extraordinary. How many times do you daydream about being nameless and faceless? Never. That's a nightmare. That's not a dream. As we conclude Ruth's story, we see in her both an example of an extraordinary life and, more importantly, a recipe for an extraordinary life. Because that's the life we really want. Whatever culture may be trying to shift us into a group, we want to be extraordinary. Ruth teaches us how. We begin in Ruth chapter 4, as I said. I know we covered all the way up to about verse 12 last week. I need to take a couple verses back and get kind of a running start into this. And I'll just throw out the PG warning now, parents. I'm not going to cross the line, but we're going to need to walk up to a few. I'll let you worry about fixing that at home, okay? So be forewarned. It's in the text. I can't do anything with it. Beginning of verse 10, Boaz, first of all, if you're taking notes, I know students, you're taking notes because they'll be required tomorrow. You're back in school. Boaz, declaration of acquisition. Ask me later how to spell it all. Boaz, declaration of acquisition. We see it in verse 10, and we're picking up right kind of in the middle of his speech. But he says, moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And so Boaz, he makes this declaration of acquisition, and most of it's talking about land. And I know it talks about Ruth in this very non-romantic, almost like cattle kind of a way, that I have acquired her as wife. I don't know about you gentlemen, don't say that to your wives, ever. Because my couch is comfortable, but you may not sleep there. I usually am. No, I'm kidding. But you just don't say, I acquired. It's not romantic, but it fits. This is him as the kinsman redeemer saying, I have acquired this land, and I recognize that with acquiring the land, I have acquired Ruth to be my wife. So he makes this great declaration. In the crowd of witnesses that are there, the elders of the town and the people who've gathered to see what's going on. And number two, then, the crowd makes a declaration of witness and blessing. So you have the crowd's declaration of witness and blessing in verses 11 and 12. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. And so the people give their assent. They acknowledge, they declare that they acknowledge, they're witnessing what he has done and what he has said and what he has acquired. And then they corporately give this blessing, which is interesting. I think Mr. Spock might say, fascinating. Because the bit about Rachel and Leah, that's okay, right? Because Rachel and Leah, if you go back into Jewish history, if you go back, Rachel and Leah were the wives of Jacob, who was also known as Israel. And so they were looked upon as really the mothers of the nation. And so to invoke their name or their familiarity in this type of blessing, that's okay. I get that. But here's what I don't get, is the bit about Perez. Now, Perez is probably not a name that you're overly familiar with. And so let me direct you, not right now, and if your kids, not without your parent watching over your shoulder, but to Genesis 38, and you get this whole great story, which you're going to need to read on your own. Now, to be fair, Perez was Boaz, let me get this right, great-great-great-great-grandfather. So it's interesting, on the one hand, here they have picked somebody who was actually, that Boaz was actually related to, his great-great-great-great-grandpappy. So that part, okay, kind of makes sense. But Perez was the son of Judah that Judah had with his daughter-in-law. And yes, you heard that right, and we'll have to read it because I'm not going to say it again. That part's kind of odd to me. And it's not the last time it's going to come up. And as enigmatic as it is, it's actually kind of part of the point. And so you'll definitely have to go to Genesis 38 and read that for yourself. And so the town makes this great declaration of witness and blessing. And then we see that God actually makes a declaration here. And this one's a little less obvious in its declaratory, intent. But God declares a happy ending. Now, how many of you remember going to Friendly's and having a happy ending Sunday? Because after you've eaten any meal, let's face it, any Sunday is a happy ending. Can we agree on that? A happy ending. My only problem with a happy ending Sunday was always one thing. It wasn't big enough. That's my own personal problem, clearly. But God declares, and we like happy endings. How many of you have read Greek tragedies and you get to the end and you're like, where's the next thing? When does the hero emerge victorious? When does he come back from the dead? Why did everybody in Greek poetry and playwrights die? All the heroes are dead. It's life. I don't want life. I want happy endings. God declares a happy ending. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel, and may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better than 7 sons, has borne him. Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her bosom, and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed, which means worshiper. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And you think about the story of Ruth to this point. It's been hard. I mean, it was almost Disney quality tragedy in places here that Elimelech would move to Moab and he would die. And that his sons would take wives of the Moabite women and then they would die. And then all of a sudden you've got Naomi and Ruth and Orpah and they're widows and they're paupers and they're living in Moab. And Naomi decides to come back. And Ruth comes back with her, and Orpah stays home. And they come back, and they're impoverished, and they're begging, and they're working in the fields. And it goes from death to destruction to hardship. To right here at the very end, there's a big fancy wedding. Ruth doesn't just marry any dude. She marries the rich dude. And she has a baby. And everybody goes, ooh and ah, and there's joy. And Naomi is no longer running around people going, don't call me Naomi, I'm bitter. You remember that where she's telling everybody, I'm a bitter old bat, call me Mara. You remember this passage, that's in there. She said that, not me. I'm not making this stuff up. But no longer, she's like, she takes Naomi. Blessed, happy. Because now she has a grandbaby. A little complicated because that grandbaby is not technically related to her, but whatever. Take it as you can get. So you get a happy ending that the Lord declares here. And then finally, and this is right at the end here, Samuel, the author of the book of Ruth, declares King David's lineage. And in doing so, he gives us the real reason this story exists at all. This is the reason that Samuel researched and wrote the book of Ruth as it was to give us this vital link in the king's lineage. And so that's, why is the Ruth even here? This is why. And so in verse 18, Samuel declares King David's lineage. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. And again, that's the odd part, because here's Perez, what he was. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begat Ram, and Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz, okay, at least somebody we do know now. And Boaz begot Obed, I guess they kept the name that the neighbors gave him. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. And so we get the king's lineage in there. And that's the end of the book. The lesson, I think, is this. Ruth lived and provided an example of an extraordinary life. Here's what she teaches us. When it comes to being extraordinary, all we have to provide is the ordinary. God provides the extra. When it comes to being extraordinary, that's just breaking extraordinary to its two words, extraordinary. When it comes to being extraordinary, all we have to provide is the ordinary. God provides the extra. You think about Ruth and how ordinary she was, how similar that she was. She lived an ordinary life. Here's what we've seen about her in her average life, filled with some of the same problems we face. She suffered the death of a husband. She had a deep friendship with her mother-in-law. She experienced the disappointment of her sister-in-law. So if you've ever had family problems, guess who knows what it's like? She relocated to an area that she didn't know, joined in living with a group of people that she didn't know. She placed herself in the care of a God she did not know. And that's huge. Because when we got saved, we said, God, I don't understand it all. I understand that you said I'm a sinner. And I agree with that because I see my life. I understand that you said you've taken care of that and you sent Jesus to die on that cross in my place and for my sins. I know you say that. I don't understand it completely, but I believe it. Because, Jesus dying on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago, matter of historical fact, not a big deal. We get that. But Jesus paying for my sins 2,000 years ago as he died on the cross, that's a bit of a leap of faith, isn't it? And so, God, I believe you, and I'm going to ask you to save me, knowing then that all of eternity, a bunch of time I can't see past my life, is secure. How's that for accepting a God you did not know? And that was her experience. She placed herself in the care of a God that she did not know. She was impoverished to the point of starvation. I mean, widows in this time frame, widows, Moab or Israel doesn't really matter. There is nobody to provide for them. The fact that they didn't relocate to their father's houses meant there was nobody there providing for them. Going from Moab to Bethlehem only made things marginally better, but they get to Bethlehem and nobody takes an immediate interest in redeeming them. They have to go out there and assert themselves to get this done. The fact that Ruth was out there gleaning tells us exactly where they were economically, where they were financially. They were literally starving to death. They were literally impoverished to that point. So if you've ever felt broke, guess who can relate? She worked hard for very little in return. I mean, we celebrate the ephah that she got, and that was a huge return for her, but that was marginal. It was great for the kind of work she was doing. That's like, working at McDonald's and actually making $15 an hour, which is going to make Big Macs like incredibly they just don't taste that good anyway, but who really wants to shell out that much money? But here she is, she's bottom line work and makes a bonus. But she's working very hard in that field, back-breaking labor for very little in return. You ever felt like that was your career? Guess who can relate? She risked a lot relationally. We talk about her going up to Boaz and uncovering his feet and throwing herself basically at his mercy. You've recognized that I've placed myself under God's protective wing. I'm asking you to place me under your protective wing. How much fear must she have had of rejection in that moment? Boaz wasn't even the closest kinsman. He could have told her to go fly a kite and been within his legal rights and his moral obligations. He had none. But she risked a lot relationally. You ever been there? If you're married, you have been. Really, you've lived there. But a lot of us have risked relationally. She married a second time, and though that's a happy ending, she had all the inherent complications that went with that. Having a blended family, having two mothers-in-law. Gentlemen, anybody? Takers? I don't think so. I have a good relationship with my mother-in-law, but I don't want a second one. But you think about it, here's Naomi. All the neighbors are like, yeah, Naomi finally had a baby. Naomi wasn't blood related to that kid at all. Her daughter-in-law was Moabite. She was already the wife of Elimelech, and Boaz was related to Elimelech, not to her. I mean, this kid was not related to her genetically at all. But it was her grandkid. Good deal if you're the kid. But she married a second time. She had all of the inherent conflicts and complications and relationally and family that go with that. But despite all the obstacles that she faced, despite all of the hardships that she endured, she simply and faithfully offered her ordinary life to God. And He added the extra. You say, what kind of extra did He add? Well, let's see. How long ago did she live? And we're still talking about her. That ain't too shabby. That's a lot of extra. Could we agree? Add to that in this lineage, let's see, make sure I get the numbers right here, that she became the great-grandmother to King David. How many of you hope your great-grandchildren become somebody rich, powerful, and famous? Even if morally suspect. I mean, she became the great-grandmother to King David. How many people can say that? And, I won't count the greats off for you, but by being the great-grandmother of David, guess who else's lineage she jumps into? King Jesus. And that's a lot of extra. That's cool. I don't care who you are. That's cool. Her life, though, was ordinary. She had heavy doses of ordinary. God provided the extra. All that she had to do was simply and faithfully offer her ordinary life to God and let God fill in the extra. That's the recipe for an extraordinary life. Isn't be extraordinary, it's be ordinary. And give your ordinary self to God and let Him put in the extra. Does that remove a ton of burdens for us? Because I want my life to be extraordinary, and it's not. I'm ordinary. I don't have to provide the extra. And I am so glad, because I'm ordinary. I don't even know where I'd get the extra. And so the question is, if your life is ordinary, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it probably is, will you simply and faithfully offer it to God and allow Him to add the extra? It sounds like a no-brainer question, but a lot of Christians actually won't. And that's a tragedy. I think some Christians are simply unaware that they should offer themselves to God. You get saved, you don't get plugged into a good church, you don't get discipled, you don't get grounded in the Word of God, and you may not even know that there's this act that you should follow God, that you should relinquish control of your ordinary life so that He can make it extraordinary. Faithfully just giving yourself to Him, because that's just all He wants is everything. I think a lot of Christians don't even know that. And so they live ordinary lives when they could be extraordinary. I think some are just unconcerned with the prospect of offering their lives. It never ceases to amaze me how many Christians live as functional atheists. That, we acknowledge God, we say, yay, God on Sunday, and then Monday through Saturday, it's like, God who? God what? And there's really no concern on their part to offer themselves to God. I think some Christians are afraid to offer themselves to God, and I think this might be starting to get a little closer to home. I don't think we probably fall too much in the first two, but I think some Christians are afraid to offer themselves to God. And this is just an observable contradiction that we live with as Christians, that we would trust God with eternity, and we don't think He can handle time, when eternity is arguably longer. But we don't trust Him with time. That doesn't make sense. It is a contradiction, and it's one we live with. And so I think some are just afraid of what it might involve. If I offer myself to God, what is He going to do? Who cares? Don't you trust Him? Ooh, that's a fine one, isn't it? And I think some Christians, and I think some of you, are experiencing the extraordinary. That your life is more amazing than you often consider it to be. As we've come through Thanksgiving, and now we're kind of on the other side, but I've still been in this mind, at least in myself, of my life is really not ordinary. In so many ways, my life is extraordinary. Not that I am. My life is. I think many of us have offered ourselves to God, and we simply offer ourselves, and we faithfully offer ourselves to God, and our life is more extraordinary than we often remember it to be. And so for you, I would say, man, it is to remember. Every once in a while, take an inventory of your life and remember how extraordinary your life really is. Because some of us have amazing lives, but we live them every day and we can't see the forest because all we're staring at is all these trees. We can't see how amazing life is because it's our life. You start talking about your life to other people and they start going, wow, you have an amazing life. Sounds like a movie. Somebody should make that. Christmas movie, I think. Anyway. But many of us live extraordinary lives. And the reason that we need to remember that is because we don't want to grow careless. We don't want to ever get to the place of saying, I've been offering myself to God faithfully, and what has He done for me lately? Because He could stop. at the point where we pull back and you say, maybe I'm not going to offer myself so much to God. Maybe I'm going to keep some of me for me. Suddenly he backs off a little bit, you back off a little bit. You ever met a Christian who used to go to church, who used to do things, who used to have this, who used to? Is that a tragedy to you when you hear that? Somebody who used to have an extraordinary life has settled for ordinary. I think that's a tragedy. It's a waste of such great potential that God has for us. The good news is that wherever you are right now, and I hope you know, the good news is that wherever you are right now, you can offer your ordinary life to God. Simply, unreservedly, faithfully. You have to do it all the time. And you can let him make your life extraordinary. Or you could settle. But why would you? Father, we love you. We thank you for the book of Ruth and the great lessons that we see in her life. Look, Father, what an extraordinary person she was, or what an ordinary person she was, and what an extraordinary life she had. Father, would you help us to take this singular lesson away, that you don't require anything of us but us. We don't have to be special for you to bless us. We don't have to be awesome. We have to be available. We have to be ordinary, and we are. And we have to give ourselves to you and let you add the extra. It's a simple lesson, but Father, it's a harder one to live out. And so would you, through your Holy Spirit, remind us of who we are, remind us of where we are, and remind us of how little we have to do to take that step to be extraordinary. Father, we'll thank you for it. In Jesus' good name.